Hello, everybody. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's event. It's a pleasure to be here this evening at the University of Chicago booth to hear from the Economics Nobel Prize winner, Richard Thaler, and former Cabinet Secretary Gus O'Donnell. Thank you all for joining us and giving us your time. Brilliant to see a full house this evening. I think the discussion is going to be a fascinating one. It'll range over topics like serious issues about the UK economy to slightly less serious matters, I'm told, of golf and sports and aspects of the good life, as Gus and Richard would say. There's going to be an opportunity for audience questions later on this evening after the discussion, and we also invite you all to join us for a drink at the reception upstairs afterwards. So before we get started, I would like to begin by thanking the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and Pro Bono Economics, who have both made this evening possible. The University of Chicago Booth School of Business, one of the world's oldest and best known business schools, as many of you know. This year, the school celebrates its 125th anniversary, so that's more than a century of delivering educational excellence, rigorous inquiry, and intellectual freedom, building a legacy of groundbreaking research and scholarship. And if you needed any evidence of that at all, you just have to look at the impressive display of Nobel laureates gracing the lobby outside, 97 to be exact, with, I noticed, lots of spaces for more pictures. They're all associated with the University of Chicago. You'll see many famous faces up there, including Enrico Fermi, Milton Friedman, President Barack Obama, and of course, tonight's speaker, Richard Thaler. So the business school has been in Europe for 30 years, and this is the campus where they teach their executive MBA program and executive education short courses. They're turning to pro bono economics. PBE is a charity that uses economics to empower the social sector and to increase well-being across the UK. It was founded around 14 years ago in the aftermath of the great financial crisis. And it combines project work with individual charities and social enterprises with policy research that can drive systemic change. So since its inception in 2009, PBE has delivered 600 service interventions to charities, supporting a total of 467 unique organizations. And in doing so, deploying almost 500 volunteer economists to support those charities. Just this year alone, PBE have supported more than 100 charitable organizations through their services. So I am hugely proud to be a trustee of Pro Bono Economics. It's been more than 30 years since I studied economics as an undergraduate. So it's wonderful to see economics being used for the power of good. And that is something that I know we're going to hear a lot more about this evening from Richard and Gus. So let me introduce our speakers more formally. We're joined by Richard Thaler, who is the Charles R. Walgreen Distinguished Service Professor of Behavioural Science and Economics at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Professor Thaler was awarded the Nobel Prize for Economic Sciences in 2017, and he's considered one of the founding fathers of behavioural economics. As a co-author of the best-selling book Nudge, he uses concepts of behavioural economics to tackle many of society's major problems. His research focuses on the intersectionality between behavioural economics, finance, the psychology of decision-making, and challenging the standard economic assumption that everyone in the economy is rational and selfish. And joining Professor Thaler is Lord Gus O'Donnell. Lord O'Donnell is a former British senior civil servant and economist who between 2005 and 2011, he served as the Cabinet Secretary, which is the highest official in the British civil service. After leaving the civil service in 2011 and being appointed a life peer in 2012, he has been extremely busy. He's the chair of Frontier Economics, a visiting professor to the London School of Economics and University College London, president of the Council of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and chair of the Trustees of Pro Bono Economics. There's much more, but we've run out of time. I'm told that Professor Thaler and Lord O'Donnell have been having a conversation on and off for 15 years now. So we get to listen in on the latest instalment of that. So please join me in giving Professor Thaler and Lord Gus O'Donnell a very warm welcome to the stage.
Both managed to get up here without falling. That's a success.
Total success. And I've got all my notes. Do you want me to kick off?
Yeah.
Since I'm on her
Age
territory
before
here.
beauty.
Yeah, okay. It's going to be like that. I'm going to look on the positive side. And I do remember, 15 years back it was the Nudge book when it first came out. And it led to a great friendship and a very productive friendship in the sense of the behavioural insights team in the UK came out of discussions that Richard had with David Cameron, who went on to become Prime Minister. And when I was the Cabinet Secretary, he said he was interested in this behavioural stuff. And I was like, whoa. And boom, we jumped in and it was fantastic. And it was just made in heaven. But that's the past. I want to look to the future. And so now, when you look back on it, Richard, what would you say is one of the biggest success for behavioral economics? Where's it made a real difference?
Well, probably the biggest success globally has been in the reform of defined contribution retirement plans. So, the traditional defined benefit plans that our fathers had and many civil servants still have are going away. And there were problems with defined contribution plans that people weren't joining, or they weren't putting enough money in, or they weren't investing it sensibly. It was really do-it-yourself investing. And people weren't very good at it. And I want to give a shout out to Adair Turner, who very early on, before all the data was in, boldly created the plan that's called NEST. And it was a plan for the UK for workers who didn't have a plan at their workplace. And it incorporates 3 tools from behavioral economics. One is people are automatically enrolled. So they are enrolled unless they opt out. Then the saving rates were gradually increased, what I used to call save more tomorrow. People have more self-control in the future. Like we're going to go on a diet next week. And a very well-designed default investment fund. And when this was introduced, as you know, there was a lot of skepticism in some quarters, some influential quarters, but it has been a huge success. Even as rates were increased from 1% to 3% to 8%, opt-out rates have been less than 10%. So 90% are in, even as we ramp the rates up. And the default investment plan has 99% of the money. So people are not going off doing crazy things. And the versions of that are going on around the world, but I wish we had something like that in the US, because we have a real problem for the people who don't have a plan. And essentially, if you don't have a retirement plan, you don't save, because people don't have the self-control to just do it themselves. So I think that's our big hit.
And it's amazing in a sense that it's so much an unsung success. I mean, there's all those old people who would have been in poverty, who now have retirement, and many, many to come. who will not be reliant on the state, will not be in serious trouble, who are actually going to be in a great position. So magnificent success. Okay. So the other side of that. So what are the big failures in terms of the behavioral stuff? And I mean, there's been a bit of scandal, Richard.
Yeah. So, all right, let's start with the scandal. Two researchers, not economists, I would add, behavioral scientists, Dan Ariely at Duke and Francesca Gino at Harvard Business School, have been, well, their cases are being processed, but the scientific evidence certainly looks like they were both guilty of fabricating data. And, you know, there's the old Yiddish term chutzpah, and the traditional definition is someone who has been convicted of murdering their parents pleads for mercy on the grounds that they're an orphan. And I think we may have a new definition now because these two researchers were researching how to get people to be honest. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And they had, I mean, one strategy, which kind of is intuitive, like you might think it would work, that if you got people to sign at the top of a form, they would be more honest than if they signed at the bottom. And we tried that at the Behavioral Insight team, a big trial in Guatemala, among other places, and it had a precisely zero effect. And that didn't stop Professor Ariely from going around selling it. So that's embarrassing. But I think it is a good contrast with Nest and the retirement plan stuff. You know, our book, we called it a book about choice architecture, how you devise a system that enables people to make good choices. And we, you know, I wanted to call the book Libertarian Paternalism is Not an Oxymoron. Somehow people thought that might sell tens of copies. So
probably an exaggeration.
High would be. So we have relatives, you know. So we called it Nudge, and that was better for selling books. But I think it sometimes creates the impression that what we want to do is sort of nudge, convince people to do something. We're not all that good at that. And the structural approach works better. Messaging can work, but it's not as powerful. And some kind of messaging is particularly weak. This signing at the top is an example of what the psychologists call priming. And that has been suspect for over a decade. So I think I was over at the Behavioral Insight team this morning, and I keep pushing for more ambitious programs, and I think there's promise if we can get in on the ground floor the way Adair had. But if you have to take everything as given, then there aren't as many degrees of freedom that you can use.
And that was Adair Turner, for the people who aren't familiar with it, who did the pension plan. I remember he was doing this pension plan for Tony Blair, actually, as Prime Minister, and that created a problem in itself, because at the time Gordon Brown was Chancellor and I was his permanent secretary, and obviously he was in charge of the economy. Therefore, we had to convince him that it was his idea. So it was all fine in the end. But it just shows you that that kind of presentation and language matters. So you mentioned the behavioral insights team, and we mentioned this earlier. There's a lot of people who are on the conservative side say, "Oh, this is terrible. You're trying to change people's behavior," you know. And so I remember there were some people at the time saying this should be called the Behavior Change Unit, and you were the one that stopped that.
Yeah, I didn't want to scare people. So, you know, we don't want to change anybody. We want to help them. So the example I like is GPS. I have the world's worst sense of direction. Sometimes I can't find my office from the cafeteria. So, you know, if I want to walk back to my hotel in Covent Garden, it's not very hard, but I would manage to get lost. But now my phone tells me how to go. Now, what's good about GPS is I pick the location. No one's telling me where to go. And it's suggesting a route. If I want to try another route, it doesn't complain. Unlike some people, you know, it doesn't say, I think you should have gone that way. So, right? So imagine that we had GPS for everything in life. That would be wonderful. And it doesn't infringe on our liberty at all. It doesn't try to change us into another person. It just helps. And, you know, there are these doors. We have a few in this building that are doors that have these big handles that are yelling, pull, and they need to be pushed. And I got people to at least put signs on those doors here, just push. But it's still, you want to pull them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the problems of life.
Yeah.
That there are handles that need to be pushed and they're yelling to be pulled. And signage can help.
Yeah. I think there's some experiments in the hospital that BIT did about good signage actually helping people go to the right place. Your bit about GPS, though, I was thinking, yeah, GPS for life, that would be good. It tells you what the right thing to do all the time is. I've got that. It's called my wife. I mean, it's like...
I've met her.
You've met her, exactly. Yes. We played golf together.
Yes, we did.
And
she was saying, Gus, hit it. The hole is that way.
That's what you see. That's what the problem with this behavioral stuff is. It tells you what you got a feeling of what you should do, especially when you do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am sitting here with a movie star, right? This is the man who is in The Big Short, right? He is the person who is in touch with Hollywood, not me. So basically, my question to you, Richard, is there's a new movie out which relates to money. Is it any good?
Yeah, so there is a movie. It's sort of in the same genre as The Big Short, although neither Selena Gomez nor I was asked to be in this movie. I think it would have been better, but the movie is called Dumb Money. And it's about the GameStop episode that you may all remember. GameStop was a chain of stores that sold video games in physical stores. It had been going down. People are buying games online. And somehow it got taken up by some individual investors, including one very charismatic guy who called himself Roaring Kitty and had a YouTube channel. And he got people excited about GameStop. And the movie is sort of depicts he and his followers at war with the evil hedge funds who are shorting GameStop. And the movie's very funny. A friend of mine and I have a piece coming out in a couple days talking about the movie. And one of the questions we ask is it really fair to refer to the retail investors as dumb money? And the answer is yes. The evidence is pretty clear that individual investors somehow have a knack of having the opposite of skill. So they pick stocks that are more likely to go down than up. They put money into the market at the peak and pull it out at the bottom. And there is one interesting fact about this, is that one of the genders is less dumb than the other, that being the fair sex. And the primary way in which they are less dumb is they trade less.
Yeah.
So overconfidence is one of the things. I'm here teaching a class for the next couple of weeks, and we talk about overconfidence. Men, it won't surprise you, are more overconfident than women. And as traders, they express that by trading more actively. And the more they trade, the worse they do. So listen to your wife.
Yeah, I can safely say she doesn't trade.
I think it's my turn to ask a question.
Okay, far away.
So, a few years ago, all we could talk about was Brexit. And I think you remember I was saying at the time that before you get a divorce, maybe you should find out whether you have a prenup. And not everyone listened to that advice.
Yeah.
And you have Brexited. But my sense is that if there were a poll now, people would prefer that you not have done it. But I don't see any clamor to reverse it. So is this a behavioral bias? Is this a changing of the minds? Without getting you into too much trouble, what's your take on all of this?
Brexit. I think Brexit was a really, really interesting example of the use of behavioral techniques for a really bad outcome. We were talking earlier about Dominic Cummings and nudge stock.
I know you're going to blame this on me.
Yeah, exactly. It's your fault because, he read the book, used the techniques, loss aversion, it's all there. I mean,
so what Gus is referring to is Dominic Cummings came up with a 3-word phrase: take back control. Genius. And there's a video of him giving a talk about this, where he's explaining that he's learned from behavioral economists this idea of loss aversion. So if you tell people they've lost something and they can get it back, that's a really good argument. Now, of course, it wasn't clear that the UK had lost anything or that they would get it back this way, but it was a powerful message. I think many people know I've been, for years, signing copies of Nudge, Nudge for Good, and that was meant as a plea. It's not, the tool is not necessarily a friendly one. And I know you and I would have preferred a different outcome on that, but the messaging was very clever. And so was his second 3-word phrase, get Brexit done. And I remember being here on one of my visits, and the sense was people just didn't want to talk about that anymore. I suppose I'm now breaking that. I brought it up. We can change the subject. But it is interesting that, it passed and now people seem to be having some regrets.
And I think what you'll find, the politics is that no one is going to say, none of the big political, neither Conservatives nor Labour, certainly not Labour, are going to say, we're going to go back in. They're going to be like, we'll have a better tone and all the rest of it. And I think one of the issues we have to learn is that if we were to think about going back in, we can't do it by having a referendum first and then a negotiation afterwards, because we will have to have a negotiation, because otherwise new members of the EU are required to sign up to the euro. And I think that would be pretty fatal for a campaign. So I don't think it's going to work. And I think Brexit's had huge negative consequences. I mean, people talk about the trade and all the rest of it, but let me tell you, from the point of view of government, one of the most difficult issues in government is when you've got with something that goes across departmental boundaries, right? And you have to get all the departments together and kind of say, look, you've got to come to a decision. There are trade-offs here, one single thing. And there was one thing that made us do that, which was, you're going into Europe, there's a directive, we're negotiating. The country needs a position on whether we're in favor of MiFID or savings directive or something like that. And so all the departments would fight it out and we would come to a position. And that was really, really helpful. What you're seeing now, and you're seeing post-Brexit, is so many of these issues where all the departments go in, they have a fight, they can't resolve it because there are trade-offs. They don't need to because there isn't an EU meeting coming up, and we end up just carrying on, doing nothing. So it's pretty horrific. Now, what I want to come back to is this question of, you're talking about humans and our biases and all the rest of it. So surely the solution is to replace us with AI. Do you think
GPS, yes.
I mean, like, it's not going to be as dumb. It's not going to be done with its money. I mean, what do you think about the behavioral biases that AI is going to have?
Well, the first thing, I'm by no means an expert in AI, but the first thing to remember is AI is created by humans. And there is this science fiction world where AI sort of creates its own second and third generations and they take over the world. If you've been involved on one of those chats, when your internet goes down and you're trying to get them to fix it, and that is AI. And believe me, they're not ready to take over the world.
No, quite.
If they can get your internet back working, that's like a major miracle. So I think the fear mongering is a bit overstated. And for sure, AI is capable of being less biased. If you ask me, what's the single biggest human bias? I would say, I'm not sure what to call it, we'll call it the attractiveness bias. More attractive people do better. Taller people do better. What can I say, Gus?
I'm a lord. You're just a Nobel Prize winner.
No, but you're the Lord O'Donnell. And so AI can't see, and it's not impressed with somebody's appearance unless you plug it in. Well, if you have facial recognition, then it could go down that path, but it won't be designed to admit handsomer people or hire handsomer people. And there are great opportunities. A good friend and colleague of mine helped develop a program for the city of Boston to use AI to decide which arrestees should be released on their own recognizance rather than held. And the model releases more people, and yet fewer crimes are committed. So you can have a policy that's more lenient and imposes fewer costs on society. So it's like the GPS model. We can use computers to make better decisions and to take the human error out of it. And now that doesn't mean we should not be careful, but many people are calling for government regulation. My question to that is, who's going to do it?
Mm. Mm.
And, you know, there are calls to stop research on AI. How? You think we're going to tell Elon to stop doing? I mean, the funny thing, Elon Musk is one of the people calling for government regulation. Now, one of the companies spending lots of money on AI is Tesla, right? They're trying to create a self-driving car. So I don't think Elon's going to stop. And, you know, every Tesla out there is providing data to help them improve that system. So we're not going to stop. And if we're going to regulate, I mean, just think of central banks. Central banks are, well, we economists like to think that they are probably the most sophisticated parts of most governments. Certainly, they're the most professional. It's hard to compare with the military, but I mean, it's lots of PhDs and lots of well-trained people, and the top people like the Board of Governors are highly trained, and they're not perfect.
No.
So imagine we had an equivalent to regulate artificial intelligence. I don't know where we would find the people or what information they would be able to get. So I think we have to keep our eye out, but it's a bit early to think that the government should take charge.
Okay. It's going to be tricky because, yeah, as soon as you impose regulations, barriers to entry, which helps a lot of incumbent firms. So I think this is going to be a tricky area. I'm trying in my head to think what it would be like to have an AI prime minister, and
pros and cons.
Pros and cons, yeah. Not going to get any sex scandals, right?
Right.
So,
right. Fewer parties.
Maybe fewer parties.
Fewer parties. I think we can
last longer than lettuces.
Yeah. AI definitely lasts longer than the lettuce.
Now,
so yeah, I think there is an upside.
There's an upside to this. There's an upside to having you here as well, because I can use you for free consultancy now. So our Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, God bless him, is talking about requiring pension funds in the UK and talking about the possibility of subsidizing them if they invest in UK companies. You talked about dumb money.
Yeah.
What do you think of this idea?
Well, Professor? Financial economists, even traditional financial economists, have talked for years about what's called home bias. So all around the world, people like to invest in companies in their own country. And I did a big research project in Sweden that I was criticizing the pension. That could have cost me one. But Swedes were investing half their money in Swedish companies. Sweden is 1% of world GDP. So that you're better off. We like to say the only free lunch in finance is diversification. And we would, 99% of economists would say, create a diversified portfolio, and that includes global diversification. And this is kind of incentivizing a bias. It would be like saying trade more. We don't And, so this proves not all mistakes are nudges. He's talking about a financial incentive, which is not a nudge, a financial incentive to do the wrong thing. And he hasn't asked my opinion, but feel free to pass it on.
Oh, I think now got that on the record. That's good. So enough of financial economics. I want to get you to the most important thing that's going to happen this week, which is the thing that you and I have shared a golf course together. Towards the end of this week, it's Europe against the US. Now, the US, for those who don't follow golf very closely, has a team where all of their members are within the top 30 rankings in the world. Individually, these guys are so much better than ours, Europeans, in terms of world rankings. And yet we're going to win. Now, and we've won on European soil for the last 30 years. So
I assume you're referring to like
what's going on.
Thumping that your girls put on us.
Killed them. 14 all.
14 all.
Yeah,
right.
killed them. Solheim Cup, just so everyone knows, European women retain the Solheim Cup courtesy of
a draw,
having won in Ohio.
Yes. Well,
it's all they needed to do. Why rub their noses in it?
The amusing thing is the captains make some decisions. And as far as I can tell, they're almost completely irrelevant. So, for example, the order of the play on the last day, the entire team plays, and each captain submits an order. If their order is better than chance, I'd be surprised. And but lots of deep thinking goes into it. And I'm wishing you luck.
Thank you.
But the Europe team has done better than you would expect based on those rankings. So I'd say your chances are pretty good.
Yeah, I think, behaviorally, we're in a good place.
The home team has an advantage. And that's another.
Yeah.
But, there's a study. And so in football, which we call soccer, in football, there is a home field bias, and it's almost entirely because of the referees.
Whoa. Now that is
and so during COVID, when they were playing some matches with no fans, no home bias.
But there were referees.
There were referees, but
what you're saying is the referees are influenced by the home fans.
Now, there are no referees in golf.
No.
So if there's a home bias, it must just be the fans cheering them on.
Actually, I learned something yesterday, which kind of horrified me about this, that the European team went to look at the place they were going to play and decided that they didn't like the fact the rough was too long, so they've had it cut. Ooh, you can do that? That seems a bit dodgy. Right, on that note, about scandals and misbehavior, because, misbehavior was the book, we have time to move to questions. So enough of us chatting amongst ourselves. Yes. Sorry, Jenny was going to go first, and then if you could be number 2, all right?
Thank you, both of you, for a fascinating discussion. I wanted to ask a question almost as important as golf, which is climate change. Have you done any research into behavioural economics and incentives and climate change and all of those trade-offs that exist in the multiple decisions that we all make that affect the climate?
So what my co-author Cass Sunstein and I did during the lockdown was rewrite nudge. We were both trapped in our homes and decided, well, this bit could be improved and this bit could be improved. And we ended up rewriting the entire book. And there's a chapter on climate change. And it begins by saying, we will not successfully deal with climate change by nudging. Nudging, I like to say nudging and choice architecture can help almost any important problem and can solve almost none. And, you know, people always tease economists about not agreeing on anything. One thing that there is uniform agreement about is we should start with a carbon tax. Pretty stiff one. Now, economists aren't all that popular, and you've probably noticed there is not widespread adoption. 100% of economists agreeing on something does not guarantee that it happens. I would like to see pretty stiff carbon tax and start with that. I think there are lots of behavioral interventions that can build on that. And so, for example, a high price is more effective if it's more salient. Imagine if the thermostat in your home starts dinging annoyingly if you're spending a lot of money because it's very hot and you have the air conditioning running or something like that, right? So you can give feedback. There's one thing we talk about in that book that we called The Final Edition as a commitment device to never be stupid enough to rewrite the entire book again. But, you know, Bill Nordhaus has talked about climate clubs. I think the big problem is getting the countries to agree. And, you know, Paris was a good start, and somehow we need international cooperation, and that's beyond my pay grade.
So I was there at the Rio Summit, the Earth Summit. God, that's going back. The amazing commitments made by all the governments. I was working with our Prime Minister of the day, John Major. No follow-up. And one of the issues at the global level, when you think about it, is what's the institution that's looking after climate change? And I have to say, the only institution that's really on the pitch is the UN. If you've worked, as I have, on the boards of the IMF and the World Bank, and you've worked with the UN, God bless them, it's really, really hard to get anything effective through that vehicle. And the power of global institutions, you just need to see the WHO, you know, like, where's their study of what worked and what didn't on COVID? Doesn't seem that they're going to do one. I mean, so I think you do need a really strong global institution to push for something, to try and get to the stage where they might well say, what about a carbon tax? You know, it's like, whoa, that seems a good idea.
If I want to put my most optimistic hat on, it would be you have to be a complete idiot not to notice what's been going on. We've had the hottest year in history. We have fires, floods. And the reason I have a glimmer of optimism is young people are noticing.
Yeah.
If you trust our generation, I think we'll blow it. If the young people get enough say and it's their game, then maybe there's a hope, but there's lots of reason to be pessimistic.
So there you have it. The behavioral solution to the climate change from Professor Thaler is you cease to have the vote when you turn 50, right? Okay, got that?
And you have to retire from Parliament.
Oh.
No, the House of Lords will let.
Come on, it's for life, you know. But maybe, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this discussion. I'm Sofia Matveeva. I'm an MBA graduate of this fine institution. I admit that the golf and football discussion went over my head, but I did enjoy the politics and economics. So my question to you is, which industry do you think has been most receptive to your work in behavioral economics, and why have they been most receptive? And which industry in general has been least receptive? Why?
Oof. Well, you know, we've talked about the retirement saving, and that is both public and private sector. So we can clear. Another, for good or for bad, companies like Amazon. Amazon has over 100 PhD economists working, and they're running experiments every second. So it's not all behavioral, but they are doing experiments. I think the whole online market community is very data driven. But I don't know, what's your experience been, Gus?
I chair Frontier Economics just along the way at Holman. We have over 400 economists. We do lots of behavioral work for industry, primarily at the consumer end. So, and the interesting part about the consumer end is you take, so it's very public. We work for Tesco's. You take their club card data. It's amazing. It's incredible data. It tells us so much about people's spending habits. So then we can experiment, right? And then we have a massive sample size. We are literally talking about millions. And you can think about sending people vouchers, about, rather than, hey, like, 10% off for something, say a bottle of wine, you can think about those consumers who, because of your previous data, you can work out a highly price elastic on something. You can work out the optimal discounts to give, not necessarily to everybody, but through discounts to some. Hence, you'll see quite a lot of work going, quite a lot of supermarkets, those Brits here, will notice a lot more where club cards, if you've got a club card, they're giving you lower prices than if you haven't. So they're starting to segment the market. There's a lot more sophisticated stuff they could do, and there's a lot more sophisticated stuff we are doing with some of our other clients. But what you've got there, and this is kind of the difference between micro and macro, is massive data sets and the ability to experiment. And you can learn incredibly quickly because...
This reminds me of, we managed through some miracle to get a law passed here that any firm that is collecting consumer data has to be willing to share that data with the consumer in an online format. I got some sentence changed.
You did.
But I think it's had no real take up. And here's a challenge to you, Gus. Get Tesco to release the data to what I call choice engines. In our day, if you had to book a flight to Chicago, you had to call a travel agent.
Yeah.
Now, even you and I, with dinosaurs, we can manage to do it online. There should be that I can download my data and say, I have a grandchild who's allergic to peanuts. I don't want any peanuts in the house. What should I stop buying? What should I switch to? I think there's a big opportunity here. Some entrepreneur should figure out how to do this.
Yeah, and you can see it on all of the search engines we got. For example, if you go on to do car insurance and all the rest of it, and one of the things you may have noticed, UK consumers, is that the behavioral insights team managed to get through a change in the regulations such that when your car insurance renewal comes along, they actually tell you what the previous year's number was, which they didn't used to do. So you just get a number and you think, oh, that's okay. And it was, of course, 20% higher than last year. And now you realize it's 20% higher than last year. So surprise, surprise, it's not 20% higher.
So my dean, we used to get a letter every year saying your salary was X and now it's Y. Now we just get a letter saying your new salary is Y. And I have no idea what it was last year. So every year I have a conversation with my wife. I got that letter, and then she, who has organized, says, okay, last year was X. But yeah, that's
So Richard has the same GPS that I do.
Right, exactly.
More
If
questions.
they collude, we're in trouble.
Whoa, yes.
Fred,
Yeah.
Hi, thanks very much for the talk. My name is Bishwa and I'm an investment professional. My question is, do you have any advice to create a nudge list for investing? I guess because the environment is you have aggregate behavior bias on the market and you also have your own behavior bias. So how do you is the nudging for investment different from other field?
well, I think our best lesson for like mass retail investing is create a low-cost, diversified fund and default people into it. Make it easy. And, you know, the affluent who have a financial advisor, there can be some more fine tuning, but for the typical worker, just getting them in and getting them invested in a sensible, diversified fund, it's all they need.
And I'm going to add, obviously, I can't give anyone professional financial advice because I'm not allowed to do that. But let me just note that if you looked at the 1-year best savings rates in the paper, you'll find they're around 5.5%, as opposed to national savings, 6.2% AER. God knows what that's all about, but get in there. Amazing. Completely safe.
Do you have to be a UK resident?
Nice. Not sure. Good question.
So maybe we have a financial advisor here.
Yeah, they can tell us afterwards. Bit of exchange rate risk there, but pound is pretty low at the minute. Yes, yes. Yeah. Well, you need to get the gender bias changed a bit. Yeah.
So Aaron Kelshiker, an investor and also a graduate from the University of Chicago booth and an MBA graduate and someone that had the pleasure and privilege of sitting in on your classes, Professor Thaler. So I'd just like to ask the question with respect to diversity, equity and inclusion. So we've had, you know, some scandals here in the UK at the CBI, as well as within financial institutions, hedge funds, where we've had, you know, very tangible examples of very poor, appalling behaviours. McKinsey's on their website very famously quotes you with respect to cognitive diversity being a great resource of trying to address some of these situations. Goldman Sachs themselves have recently settled on 2,800 cases of sexual harassment in the hundreds of millions. It'd be great to get your thoughts on choice architecture and nudges potentially that could help us address DEI potentially within financial services and society at large. Thanks very much.
Ooh.
Gus?
Big one.
See, he already had a class from me, so I think he deserves your...
That's it. That's interesting because I do think this is about culture and this is about the culture that you set up. And I think that if you look back on, you know, my life through the civil service, there were certainly big power imbalances within the, and I think there are within almost any institution. And you do need to think about how you handle those. I think there's a lot that comes from the top. There's a lot that requires leadership to demonstrate this, which is why it's so disappointing when it's the leadership that go wrong. And so I think showing, you know, that we have no tolerance for that is massively important to everybody else. And I think the younger generation have a better attitude to this as well, which is they're not as tolerant as some of the things that I grew up with and the, some of the biases that were inherent in there. And I think that there is also the kind of classic thing, which obviously a professor of economics would have taught you, about the biases and losses that come from a biased outlook on these things. You know, the losses you get from not choosing the best people irrespective of, you know, and, you know, by being biased towards one particular gender or one ethnicity or whatever, how much you lose out on. So there's a, you know, there's a strong economic case for this. And there's a strong moral case, obviously. So I think you put all that lot together, and I think, you know, you come down to a situation where, you know, for me, one of the great things about the British civil service was meritocracy. You know, we got away from it being the sons, and actually mainly sons, of the aristocracy coming in with no competition. You know, Northcote Trevelyan reforms actually said, well, actually, why don't we have a competitive exam? And so, you know, it has worked its way through the system to be something like that. And you would therefore want to show that that system has produced good results. And I think over the long term, it probably has. We've had some struggles recently, but I think on balance, you can see institutions that do the right thing surviving, and those that have gone seriously wrong are really suffering at the minute. And I think we need to learn the lessons of that and make sure that we have a very diverse workforce in the right to start with, that actually picks up on these biases and picks up on bad behavior and actually calls it out in a way that they feel confident to do.
Yeah, let me just add one thought to that, which is, I think that there's a big market failure. So a friend of mine, Claudia Golden, is probably the leading scholar on the wage gap between men and women. And what she's found is the most important factor is that when women take time out for having a kid, like, they never catch up. And there has been a big problem that if a woman wants to go back to work part-time, the market has not offered suitable positions. Now, I think there has to be a way to take a talented, underemployed woman and be able to give her a job 3 days a week, or one that allows her to end the day at 3 o'clock, or what have you. And my daughter-in-law is sort of an example of law graduate, started at a fancy law firm, had her first of my grandchildren, went to a boutique firm that had alleged part-time that was only 60 hours a week, and then had the second grandchild and never really went back because there wasn't anything family friendly. So I think the firms that figure this out, and obviously childcare is going to be part of it, but flexibility, we've learned something about flexibility through the pandemic, but there's a lot more that we can learn. And there's money to be made by hiring talented women and giving them jobs that they can do better.
And I hope that the whole working from home thing might help this. Right, we have time for one last question. Gentleman at the front there. Can we bring the mic forward? Right.
Thank you very much. My name is David Legg from Innovate UK. And firstly, before my question, just wanted to thank Richard, because earlier on today, I was at the Digital Catapult, and they were very proud that they said that they'd instigated one of your suggestions in your nudge book about putting targets in urinals. So it made sure that, which has saved a lot of cleaning costs. But my question, I mean, but then this afternoon I went, because at Innovate, we're aware that for every 7 applicants we get for innovation grants, we only get 1 from a woman. So we're looking at how we can encourage more female participation. So I went to King's College this afternoon to see an inspirational lady who's done an amazing innovation. And she's a nurse, so we're trying to reach out to new communities. But obviously it's thinking around, so we're trying to champion and have champions to sort of promote. But are there nudge techniques where you could look at where there are biases? I mean, we call them a bit of like grant junkies, where people are always coming back for more money, and it seems to be the same people again and again. So could we look at how we could reach out to new communities or use nudge techniques to do that? Be interested in your views.
Well, I mean, I just agree with you and applaud it, and repeat what I said, which is, think about in whatever context you are, what are the opportunities you're missing out on because of doing things the way that it's always been done? I mean, I think if I was never the best at math or statistics or whatever, my primary skill in doing economics was not thinking that the way we've always done it is the right way to do it. And I think more rebels.
I would just add, this is a shameless link, that sometimes by making people more aware of something, you can increase the number of people and change their behavior somewhat. So one classic example that pro bono economics came up with was looking at people's wills, and we were looking at the question of whether they left money to charity in their wills. There are big tax advantages from doing so. Hope you've all done it. If you haven't done your will, think about it. And the question was, when we compared those where a financial advisor had mentioned the tax breaks versus those where they hadn't, there was a 40% increase for where they just mentioned it. Didn't go any further, just mentioned the fact that it exists. So I think getting the message out there that these things exist to as wide an audience as you can is going to be potentially very valuable. Not sure you'll get 40%, but you know, it's worth a try. And I think Richard and I would both say in all of these things, you know, experiment, you know, try things, because we don't know the answers to everything, but we can find out. So at that point, the one thing that we need to answer is the call to the drinks upstairs. And we're going to hand over to Jenny to tail us after she topped us. I think that's fair.
Thank you both. Have I got the microphone on? Yeah, sorry. Thank you both, Gus and Richard, for a really fascinating discussion and for bringing economics to life so vividly. GPS for Life, Richard, I think that could be the name of your next book. If you enjoyed tonight's event, and we hope you did, there are more to follow, both from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and from Pro Bono Economics. Next week, Chicago Booth's Clark Center for Global Markets is going to host a discussion on the market and policy response to recent global disruption in Ukraine and China. It's a free event. It's here on campus on the 5th of October, and we'll be sending details in a follow-up email. And if you'd like to find out more about Pro Bono Economics, and another shameless plug, do grab one of the PBE team. There's quite a few of us here tonight, so do grab them over a drink. And as Gus said, we do hope you're going to join us upstairs. It's not compulsory. You have a choice. The incentive is a lovely glass of wine, and we hope to see you there. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks a lot. That was always brilliant.